Hello and welcome to Daily Memory Lab study session number 12. In today's study session, we will be doing round 3 of page number 11 to 16, Supply Under GST chapter, and then we will do round 2 of whatever we studied yesterday, which is from page number 43 to page number 52. And if time permits, we will see an extra maybe 5 pages from page number 53 to page number 57 if time permits. So before we begin the studies, let us set the intention for today's study session. Now I am going to study for 30 to 60 minutes with full focus. In this study session, I lower down all my expectations and embrace imperfection. I may or may not get big breakthroughs in this study session, and I am totally okay with it. I will most likely make mistakes in the next 30 to 60 minutes, and if I make them, I am not going to judge myself. I embrace my mistakes and reset my ambitions. My goal is not to achieve perfection. My goal is only to make a tiny bit of progress in the next 30 to 60 minutes. On that note, let us begin our study session today. We are going to revise page number 11 to 16 first. So let us begin from this analysis part. The definition of supply as contained in section 7 of 7 is an inclusive definition and does not define the term exhaustively. It defines the scope of supply in an inclusive manner. Clause A of subsection 1 illustrates the forms of supply, but the list is not exhaustive. This is further substantiated by the use of words such as in the definition. So CGST provisions have been made applicable to IGST. The meaning and scope of supply in terms of section 7 can be understood in terms of following parameters. Supply should be of goods or services. Supply should be made for a consideration. Supply should be made in the course or furtherance of business. So these three are essential limbs of the definition. There should be goods or services, there should be a consideration, and it should also be done in the course or furtherance of business. Aforesaid parameters describe the concept of supply. However, there are a few exceptions to second and third parameters, the requirements of supply being made for a consideration and in the course of furtherance of business in the GST law. Few exceptions have been carved out where a transaction is deemed to be a supply even without consideration. And similarly, the condition of supply to be made in the course or furtherance of business has been relaxed in case of import of services. Import of services for a consideration, whether or not in the course or furtherance of business, is treated as supply. Further, there are also cases where a transaction is kept out of scope of supply despite the existence of the above parameters. That is, there is a list of activities which are treated neither as a supply of goods nor a supply of services. In other words, they are outside the scope of GST. GST law has classified certain activities, transactions, either as supply of goods or as supply of services. Government is empowered to notify transactions that are to be treated as a supply of goods and not as a supply of service, and or as a supply of service and not as supply of goods. In the subsequent paras, the above aspects of supply have been extensively discussed. Discussion has been broadly categorized into the following. Supply includes supply of goods or services for consideration in the course or furtherance of business. So there has to be supply of goods or services or both, and then supply includes specified forms of supply, should be for consideration and should be in the course or furtherance of business. Forms of supply, consideration in the course or furtherance of business. Activities or transaction between a person other than an individual and its members or constituents for cash, deferred payment or other valuable consideration. So this is the classic case that we saw where a resident welfare association does a certain service to the people. The example that I can readily remember is the one where a resident welfare association pays the electricity bills of its tenants, the members whoever are living in that society, and for that they charge a very nominal amount of commission. So in that situation, it will be treated as consideration. For cash, deferred payment or other valuable consideration, it will be treated as supply. Importation of services for consideration, whether or not in the course or furtherance of business, it will be considered as supply. Supply without consideration, section 7 subsection 1 clause C and schedule 1. Supply excludes non-supplies under GST, section 7 subsection 2 plus schedule 3. And then finally there are activities to be treated as purely as supply of goods or purely as supply of services. Now let us see the first thing. Supply of goods or services for consideration in the course or furtherance of business. Supply should be of goods or services or both. The definition of supply begins with the term supply includes, thus making it clear that GST Act intends to give an extensive meaning to the term supply. Supply includes all forms of supply of goods or services or both. Supply of anything other than goods or services like money, securities, etc. does not attract GST. Okay, so goods are there, services are there, supply will get covered between the both. Anything which is neither goods or services, you will not have supply. So possible items that can come here are money and securities. The term goods and services as defined under the Act have been analyzed by a way of diagram on the next page. Anything supplied other than goods or services is outside the scope of supply. Goods means every kind of movable property and it includes actionable claim, growing crops, grass and things attached to or forming part of the land which are agreed to be severed before supply or under a contract of supply. Services means anything other than goods which also includes activities relating to use of money or conversion of money by cash by any other mode from one form or currency denomination to another for which a separate consideration is charged. Now, both of them exclude money and securities. Okay, next, supply includes specified forms of supply and it should be for consideration and should be in the course or furtherance of business. Okay, first part of section 7 clause A of subsection 1 includes all forms of supply of goods or services or both such as sale, transfer, barter, exchange, license, rental, lease or disposal made or agreed to be made for consideration in the course or furtherance of business. Sale, transfer, barter, exchange, license, rental, lease, disposal for consideration in the course and furtherance of business. If all these three conditions fulfill, then they will get called as supply. It is important to note that supply includes all forms of supply within its purview, though 8 illustrative forms of supply have been enlisted in the definition. Further, supply as contemplated in this first part has 2 prerequisites. There should be a consideration and it should be done in the course or furtherance of business. Now let us talk about the different forms of supply. Various forms of supply contemplated in section 7 subsection 1 clause A are sale, transfer, barter, exchange, license, rental, lease or disposal. These forms of supply are only illustrative and not exhaustive. However, none of these terms have been defined under the Act. In order to understand their meaning, we have taken recourse to their dictionary meaning or otherwise and have explained them as follows. Sale and transfer. The dictionary meaning of term sale is the act of selling, specifically the transfer of ownership of and title to property from one person to another for a price. As per the Sale of Goods Act 1930, a contract of sale of goods is a contract whereby the seller transfers or agrees to transfer the property in goods to the buyer for a price. Further, the term transfer has been defined in the Black's Law of Dictionary as to convey or remove from one place, person, etc. to another, pass or hand over from one to another, specifically to make over the possession or control of. A shopkeeper sells a pen for 100 rupees to the buyer. After the sale, the pen belongs to the buyer and the shopkeeper does not have any right on the pen. This is a transaction of sale. A company transfers goods from its factory to the depot for sale purposes. This is transfer of goods where the sale has not yet taken place. Okay, second point, barter and exchange. The dictionary meaning of term barter is to exchange goods or services for other goods or services instead of using money. Black's law of dictionary defines the term exchange as an act of giving or taking one thing for another, while barter deals with a transaction which only includes an exchange of goods or services. Exchange may cover a situation where the goods are paid for partly in goods and partly in money. When there is a barter of goods or services, same activity constitutes supply as well as consideration. When a new car worth rupees 5 lakh is purchased in exchange of an old car along with the monetary consideration of 4 lakhs paid for the said purchase, this is an exchange transaction. However, a doctor got his hair cut from a barber and provides him medical consultancy in return. In this transaction, the doctor provided the medical consultancy services to the barber, for which consideration was in the form of haircutting services provided by the barber. Similarly, the barber provided haircutting services to the debtor, for which consideration was in the form of medical consultancy services provided by the doctor. So in this situation, it is called a barter transaction. Okay, so with that, we completed round 3 of this segment, 11 to 16 page number. I would say I feel pretty good confident right after from where I was in round 2. So comparing to where I was after round 2 and now in round 3, I feel much better. The definitions are more and more, the concept is very well settling in my mind. I'm only hopeful that when we finish round 4 or round 5, it will only be like super clear for us. Next step, we will go to page number 43 and 52. Whatever we studied today, let us revise them now. 43 page number. We started from here yesterday, so let us begin. Importation of services, para 4 of schedule 1. Importation of services by a person from a related person or from his establishments located outside India without consideration in the course or furtherance of business shall be treated as supply. Just now we saw in the supply definition the same point in much detail. It has come here. Import of services from a related person or from his establishments located outside India without consideration in the course or furtherance of business shall be treated as supply. Jumru Associates received legal consultancy from its head office located in Malaysia. The head office has rendered such consultancy services free of cost to its branch office. Since Jumru Associates and the head office are related persons, services related by Jumru Associates will qualify as supply even though the head office has not charged anything from it. Chakmak, a proprietor registered in Delhi, has sought architect services from his son located in US with respect to his newly constructed house in Delhi. Although services have been received by Chakmak without consideration from his son, a related person, it will still not qualify as supply since the same has not been received in the course or furtherance of business. Okay, so import of services with consideration, without consideration. If it is with consideration, it doesn't matter whether you receive it in the course or furtherance of business, it will be deemed as supply. If you receive it without consideration, then if it is only from a related or distinct person, if it is only in the course or furtherance of business, it will be treated as supply. In the other case, it will be treated as not a supply, which means if there is no consideration and if it is not done for business purposes, then it is not a supply. In the preceding paragraphs, we have discussed the provisions of Schedule 1, which enumerates the cases where an activity is treated as supply even though it is undertaken free of cost. In this backdrop, let us imagine now whether the items given free of cost in case of some of the sales promotion schemes qualify as supply or not. A number of sales promotion schemes are commonly employed by the businesses to increase sale volume or to encourage the use or trial of a product or services so that new customers get attracted towards their products. For instance, certain sections of trade and industry such as pharmaceutical companies often provide drug samples to their stockists, dealers, medical practitioners, etc. Or sometimes companies announce offers like buy one get one free, that is buy one soap and get one soap free, or get one toothbrush free along with purchase of toothpaste. As we have already seen that as per section 7 subsection 1 clause A of clause A, the goods and services which are supplied free of cost without any consideration shall not be treated as supply except in case of activities mentioned in schedule 1. In view of the same, few sales promotion schemes have been examined as under free samples and gifts. Samples which are supplied free of cost without any consideration do not qualify as supply under GST except where the activity falls under the ambit of schedule 1. Next point, buy one get one free offer. It may appear at first glance that in case of offers like buy one get one free, one item is being supplied free of cost without any consideration. In fact, it is not an individual supply of free goods, but a case of two or more individual supplies where a single price is being charged for the entire supply. It can at best be treated as supply of two goods for the price of one. Taxability of such supply will be dependent upon whether the supply is a composite supply or a mixed supply, and the rate of tax shall be determined accordingly. Okay, Mr. Venkat hired a professional firm based in the UK to receive the legal consultancy service for his family dispute. The services received by Mr. Venkat in case such services received by Mr. Venkat, okay, for a consideration of $1,000. So in the first situation, he has received the service for free, and it is also a family dispute thing. So it's a personal service. There is no business element to it. Therefore, the first thing will not amount to supply, but the second subdivision is for a consideration of $1,000. So in that situation, it will amount to supply. So option B is the right answer, which we saw yesterday itself. There has always been an ambiguity as to whether activities or transactions involving supply of goods or services by any person other than an individual to its members or vice versa fall within the purview of supply or not. Clause A to section 7 subsection 1 brings in the certainty that said activities or transactions are covered within the scope of supply under GST and ensures the levy of GST on such activities or transactions. This has been discussed as under activities or transactions between a person other than an individual and its members constituents for consideration. So this is that resident welfare thing. Activities or transactions between a person other than an individual, that is association or club, and its members or constituents for cash, deferred payment or other valuable consideration are covered within the ambit of supply. 7 subsection 1 clause AA. Further explanation to clause AA to section 7 subsection 1 clarifies that for the purpose of this clause, such person, that is the association or club, and its members or constituents shall be deemed to be two separate persons, and the supply of activities or transactions between them shall be deemed to take place from one such person to another. The explanation starts with a non-obstante clause and shall therefore have an overriding effect over anything contained in any other law for the time being in force, or any judgment, decree or order of any court, tribunal or authority. The aforesaid explanation prevents the application of doctrine of mutuality by such prevents the application of doctrine of mutuality. So doctrine of mutuality is like me doing service to myself, I doing service to myself. So that is doctrine of mutuality. So if you consider this resident welfare association, so it is not a separate legal entity in the eyes of Income Tax Act or in the eyes of any taxation acts. Therefore, they can claim this doctrine of mutuality. So resident welfare association and the people who live there are one and the same. They will say that. So in that situation, they will say whatever the services that they do for themselves will not be taxable. So here in this section, the explanation starts with a non-obstante clause. So they are saying that nothing else matters. Whatever we are saying here, it will override everything else which has been said to the contrary of this. So example, Resident Welfare Association of Sanskriti Society supplies air conditioners to its members at a concessional price. Resident Welfare Association collects maintenance charges from its members for services provided. Here, in both the aforesaid examples, it shall be deemed that the Resident Welfare Association and its members are two separate persons, and it shall be deemed that the supply has taken place from Resident Welfare Association to its members. Okay, activities or transactions to be treated as supply of goods or services. Section 7, subsection 1A classifies certain activities or transactions constituting supply either as supply of goods or as supply of services. So this is a clarifying data. So these are the following examples will have an element of ambiguity to decide whether they are supply of goods or supply of services. So this subsection is a clarificatory one. So let us see them in detail. This helps in mitigating the ambiguities which existed in the earlier laws. Under earlier tax regime, the restaurants used to charge both service tax and VAT on the food served. This is so because both sale of goods and provision of service were involved, and therefore taxable event under both the statutes, that is respective VAT law and service tax law, got triggered. Under GST, the supply by a restaurant is treated as a composite supply, since supply of food and service is naturally bundled in the ordinary course of business. Further, entry 6B of Schedule 2 specifically provides that such composite supply shall be treated as supply of service. Hence, the entire value of invoice shall be treated as value of service and leviable to GST accordingly. So like this, they have decided, they have given a clear decision and cleared out the element of ambiguity. So transfer of title in goods, supply of goods, transfer of right in goods or undivided share in goods without transfer of title thereof. So I'm just giving the right only, I'm not giving the title at all, I'm just giving the right only. So you can think of this example as OTT buying the movies fully and OTT just renting the movies and series for a time being for a fixed fee. So here OTT buying a full movie, then it's a transfer of title, and OTT just buying the rights for a given period, then it is transfer of there is no transfer of title, therefore it is a supply of service. Okay, third situation, any transfer of title in goods under an agreement which stipulates that property in goods shall pass at a future date upon payment of full consideration is agreed. So future date, it's like hire purchase system and sale or return basis. So they are still considered as supply of goods. Land and building, any lease, tenancy, easement, license to occupy land, supply of service. So lease, tenancy, license to occupy land, supply of service. Any lease or letting out of building including a commercial, industrial or residential complex for business or commerce, wholly or partly, supply of service. Treatment or process, any treatment or process which is applied to another person's goods, supply of services. Goods forming part of business assets or transferred or disposed of by or under directions of persons carrying on the business so as no longer to form part of those assets, supply of goods. Goods held or used for business are put to private use or are made available to any person for use for any purpose other than business by or under directions of person carrying on the business, supply of service. A person manufacturing and selling wooden furniture takes one share manufactured by him for use at his house. Goods forming part of assets of any business carried on by a person who ceases to be a taxable person shall be deemed to be supplied by him in the course or furtherance of his business immediately before he ceases to be a taxable person. In that situation, it is supply of goods. Arun, a trader, is winding up his business. Any goods left in stock shall be deemed to be supplied by him. Okay. Exceptions. Business is transferred as a going concern to another person. Business is carried on by a personal representative who is deemed to be a taxable person. Okay, point number 5. Renting of immovable property. Renting of a commercial complex renting of precincts of a religious place, renting of property to an educational institution, permitting use of immovable property for placing vending dispensing machines, all supply of services, construction of complex building and civil structure. So this is what we saw yesterday. If the builder has received the consideration only after getting certificate of completion from a competent authorities, certificate of completion has to be obtained. Let's say I am a builder and I put my own money and built the house, built the building, and only after getting the certificate of completion from the competent authority, I got the consideration, even the first rupee I got after that. So in that situation, it will be treated as supply of goods. However, let's say I am a builder, I already found the party who is going to buy this, and I already got a portion of consideration from them periodically. In that situation, I started getting consideration before the completion of services. In that situation, I started receiving consideration in part from the party even before completion of the building and getting the certificate of completion from the competing authority. In that situation, it will be treated as supply of services. Let's go to next. Temporary transfer or permitting use or enjoyment of any intellectual property right. It is supply of services. Okay, so the difference here is, I have to correct myself. The difference here is, this is any transfer of right in goods or undivided share in goods. So this, they talk about goods, but still it will be deemed as supply. The copyright example that I gave about this OTT shows will come here. It will belong here. Any transfer or permitting use for a temporary basis. Okay. Development, design, programming, customization, adaptation, upgradation, enhancement, implementation of IT software, supply of services. Agreeing to obligation or to refrain from an act or to tolerate an act, situation, or to do an act. Cable operator Sakaram entered into an agreement with cable operator Atmaram that Sakaram will not provide connections in the specified areas where Atmaram is providing the connections. Non-compete agreements constitute supply of service. Security deposit forfeited in the event or of cancellation of tour package by the customer. It will also be considered as supply of service. Transfer of right to use any goods for any purpose for cash, deferred payment, or other valuable consideration. Machinery given on hire, supply of services. Okay, now works contract, where means a contract for building, construction, fabrication, completion, erection, installation, fitting out, improvement, modification, repair, maintenance, renovation, alteration, or commissioning of any immovable property wherein transfer of property in goods, whether as goods or in some other form, is involved in the execution of such contract. So it will be considered as supply. All works contract will be considered as supply of service. Supply by way of or as part of any service or in any other manner whatsoever of goods, being food or any other article for human consumption or any drink, where such supply or service is for cash, deferred payment, or value of other valuable consideration. Basically restaurant services. So that's what they are saying in a very scientific way, isn't it? Supply by way of or part or as part of any service or in any other manner whatsoever of goods, being food or any other article for human consumption. So technically hotel business, restaurant businesses, or any drink where such supply is for cash, deferred payment, or other consideration, fully treat it as services. Okay, now let us proceed further. We have completed round 2 of whatever we studied yesterday. We studied till here yesterday, so this is also completed. Now let us go to study session 12, the new things that we are going to study. 2.52 to however long we study. Let us go. Taxability of tenancy rights under GST. CBIC has clarified the taxability of tenancy rights under GST as under Pagadi system. The transfer of tenancy rights against a tenancy premium is prevalent in some states. In Pagadi system, the tenant acquires tenancy rights in the property against payment of tenancy premium called pagadi. The landlord may be owner of the property, but the possession of the same lies with the tenant. Okay, landlord will still be the owner, but tenant takes the possession. Okay, the tenant pays periodic rent to the landlord as long as he occupies the property. The tenant also usually has the option to sell the tenancy right of the said property, and in such a case has to share a percentage of the proceeds with owner of land as laid down in their tenancy agreement. Okay, so it's like subletting, I think. Alternatively, the landlord pays to tenant the prevailing tenancy premium to get the property vacated. Such properties in Maharashtra are governed by Maharashtra Rent Control Act 1999. I was able to understand till here. This alternatively, I'm not able to understand. Alternatively, so till here, what are they saying? Let's say I have a house and I have appointed a tenant. I still have the ownership. My tenant has the possession. Now the tenant keeps paying me periodic rent because I am the landlord. Now the tenant also has the option to sell the tenancy right of the said property. So the tenant has the right to let somebody else have possession of the property and pay rent to my tenant. So in that situation, my tenant will sublet the property to somebody else. He will let somebody else stay in the same property, my property, but he is the official tenant. The person, let's say I am person A, person B is my tenant, and he will let person C to occupy the property, and he will collect some amount of rent from person C, and he will share that rent to me, person A. So this is what I feel they have told till here. But what they have told here, let's read one more time. Alternatively, the landlord pays to tenant the prevailing tenancy premium to get the property vacated. Now this is where I am not able to understand why as a landlord I have to pay the tenant any premium. This is I am not able to understand because I have not heard of such systems in Tamil Nadu. We really don't. In fact, we even don't have the concept of subletting in the first place. So if I have a building and I have a tenant, the tenant is not supposed to let it further to somebody else. The moment I see my tenant letting out my property without my knowledge or with my knowledge, to moment he has the idea of letting it out to somebody else, he will be vacated the first moment. So anyway, let us see how let's see if they have further explained it down the line. It has been clarified that the activity of transfer of tenancy right against consideration squarely covered under supply of service liable to GST. It is a form of lease or renting of property, and such activity is specifically declared to be a service in para 2 of schedule 2 as discussed in table above. That is, any lease, tenancy, easement, license to occupy land is a supply of service. Although stamp duty and registration charges have been levied on such transfer of tenancy rights, it shall still be subject to GST, merely because a transaction or supply involves execution of documents which may require registration and payment of registration fee and stamp duty would not preclude them from scope of supply and from payment of GST. The transfer of tenancy rights cannot be treated as sale of land or building in para 5 of schedule 3. Thus it is not a negative list activity. This concept is discussed under next heading, and consequently a consideration for the said activity shall attract levy of GST. I have been finding this pattern. A moment of break here. I have been finding this pattern. Day one, whenever I read something new, my level of understanding on that has been, I will say, 20 to 25%. It's like I'm able to understand. At the same time, I'm not so confident about what I'm reading. Some things are pretty obvious, like temporary transfer of or permitting use, enjoyment of any intellectual property. These are some very good examples which you already know, you can relate, you can connect with. So they go to your brain and you really comprehend them the very first time itself. Like development of a software. These are all pretty obvious examples. But when you see something like a Pagadi system which you have not heard before, so it is taking a bit of time. But again, as we said in the intention, Our job is not to achieve perfection at the right first time of reading itself. We will wait and see, because whatever that we have read today, round 3 and round 2 of whatever read is today, the comprehension has significantly improved from where it was the last time. So anyway, let's keep that in mind and let's proceed. The transfer of tenancy rights cannot be treated as sale of land or building in para 5 of schedule 3. Thus it is not a negative list activity, and consequently consideration for the said activity shall attract levy of GST. So the sum and substance is, if something of this Pagadi system happens, there is going to be GST. To sum up, the activity of transfer of tenancy rights is squarely covered under the scope of supply and taxable per se. Transfer of tenancy rights to a new tenant against consideration in the form of tenancy premium is taxable. Transfer of tenancy rights to a new tenant against consideration in any form of tenancy premium is also taxable. Okay, the only part that I don't understand is, alternatively the landlord pays to tenant the prevailing tenancy premium. I'm just not able to wrap up my mind around it. If you are listening or watching this, if you belong to Maharashtra or any other state where such system happens, I am totally able to understand this paragraph. Just let me know, is the material correct in the first place? You can say that also, and at the same time you can also let me know if it is really correct, what is actually the system, why the landlord pays to the tenant. I am not able to understand that part. Okay, right, but anyway, taxability of tenancy rights, transfer of tenancy rights, GST is there. It is considered as supply, and it is a supply of service. However, renting of residential dwelling for use as a residence to an unregistered person is exempt. That I understand, this is quite common only. Hence, grant of tenancy rights in a residential dwelling for use as residence dwelling against a tenancy premium or periodic rent or both to an unregistered person is exempt. As regards services provided by outgoing tenant by way of surrendering the tenancy rights against consideration in the form of a portion of tenancy premium is liable to GST. Okay, again, as regards services provided by outgoing tenant by way of surrendering the tenancy rights against consideration. Again, this is something to do with that Pagadi system, I think. So, not able to understand this portion. I am able to understand till here. This portion is open loop. Okay. Now, let's go to the second point. Clarification on agreeing to the obligation to refrain from an act or to tolerate an act or a situation or to do an act. Okay, this is pretty simple only. Anyway, let's read it through. Agreeing to the obligation to refrain from an act or to tolerate an act or a situation or to do an act has been specifically declared to be a supply of service in paragraph 5E of schedule 2 if the same constitutes a supply within the meaning of GST Act. CGST Act. Expression agreeing to the obligation to refrain from an act or to tolerate an act or a situation or to do an act has three limbs. First point is agreeing to the obligation to refrain from an act. So let's say we saw this example, right? So there is a cable operator. He operates in an area. Let's say he has control of 4 streets. Now I want to open a business, cable operating business. Now I have an agreement with the person. That operator has specifically asked me to not come into competition in those 4 streets. Looks like for that he might be paying a bit of consideration for me, non-compete fee, something like that. So that is the point here. Agreeing to, if I agreed in the first place, okay, you have asked me to come not to your territory, I will not come to your territory. So an obligation to refrain from an act, right? Agreeing to the obligation to tolerate an act or a situation. Okay, so something is happening actually, and let's say I am further asking to, in this situation I am the new entrant and the person who is already there, he tolerates my invasion of his territory. So in that situation, again the second situation, that will be the second situation. And third thing is agreeing to the obligation to do an act. This is quite common, like I have been asked to come and deliver a speech in a firm. So I've agreed to it, to do an act. Singers will be asked to come and perform. Yes, they agree to it. So they have to do an act. Okay, so let's see the first limb. Example of activities that would be covered by this part of the expression would include non-compete agreements. Yeah, where one party agrees not to compete with the other party in a product or service or geographical area against a consideration. So this is very important. So if the cable operator asks me to stay away from his territory, I am not going to go quietly and listen to his orders. I will ask a consideration. Okay. Another example of such activities would be a builder refraining from constructing more than certain number of floors, even though permitted to do so by the municipal authorities, against a compensation paid by the neighboring housing project which wants to protect its sunlight, or an industrial unit refraining from manufacturing activity during certain hours against an agreed compensation paid by neighboring school which wants to avoid noise during those hours. Okay, this is a very good set of examples. Totally understandable. Let's say I have a permit to construct 10 floors, but the building next to my project will not. Let's say they have, like, it's a completed project and they have only, let's say, 7 floors. So they ask me to stop at 7th floor, or they ask me to stop at 6th floor, or maybe something like that, or maybe even 5th floor. So people at 5th and 6th and 7th floor will get sunlight. If I go ahead and construct all 10 floors, of course, the shorter building which is next to my building will not get any sunlight. So in that case situation, I construct 5 less floors and I receive a consideration for that. So that is again, understandable. Next, agreeing to the obligation to tolerate an act or a situation. This would include activities such as a shopkeeper allowing a hawker to operate from the common pavement in front of his shop against a monthly payment by the hawker. Again, a very good example. Okay. Or a resident welfare association tolerating the use of loudspeakers for early morning prayers by a school located in the colony, subject to the school paying an agreed sum to the RWA as compensation. Okay, fine. Another good example. I can actually relate to this. We have a school near by our house, and they don't pay any money, but let's say we are tolerating the act of every morning and evening, the welcome prayer and leaving prayer. Okay, fine. So we are actually tolerating the act, but we are not paid any consideration or anything. But let's say if there is a consideration to it, fine, it will be covered under the meaning supply. Agreeing to the obligation to do an act. This would include the case where an industrial unit agrees to install equipment for its zero emission or discharge at the behest of the RWA of a neighboring residential complex against a consideration paid by such RWA, even though emission or discharge from the industrial unit was within permissible limits and there was no obligation upon the individual to do so. Above 3 activities must comply with the following condition. There must be an expressed or implied agreement or contract that must exist. Above 3 activities must be under an agreement or a contract, whether express or implied, to fall within the ambit of para 5E of schedule 2. In other words, one of the parties to such agreement must be under a contractual obligation. So there has to be an element of contract, either implied or an explicit or an express contract, under a contractual obligation to either refrain or tolerate or do. Okay, such contractual arrangement must be an independent arrangement in its own right. Such arrangement or agreement can take the form of an independent standalone contract or may form part of another contract. Thus, a person can be said to be making a supply by way of refraining from doing something, tolerating an act or situation to another person, if the first person was under an obligation to do so and then performed accordingly. Okay, such a contract cannot be imagined or presumed to exist just because there is flow of money from one party to another. There must be an express or implied promise by the recipient of money to agree to do or abstain from doing in return for the money paid by him or to him, paid to him. Consideration must flow in return to this contract or agreement. Such consideration must flow in return from the other party to this contract or agreement to the first party for such refraining, tolerating, or doing. Okay. Which of the following activities qualify as supply of goods? Dhruv Electronics supplies washing machines to its customers. Yes, it is supply. Big Bang Steels Limited supplies a machinery on rent to Jigyasa manufacturers. This is supplying a machinery on rent. So this is supply of service. The first one is supply of goods. This is supply of services. Larsen Technicians retreats the tires given by Deen Dayal Automobiles on job work basis. So works contract, job work and all, it will be covered under service only. Vigyan Technologies develops a customized software for a business school. So developing of customized software, service only. Okay, here what have they given here? 24 and 25. Apart from this, in this circular, CBIC has clarified issues with respect to GST applicability on liquidated damages, compensation and penalty arising out of breach of contract or other provisions of law. Generally, in the event of the breach of a contract, a compensation is payable. Cash compensation agreed to by a signed written contract for breach of contract payable to the aggrieved party is known as liquidated damages. The circular clarifies that liquidated damages cannot be said to be a consideration received for tolerating the breach or non-performance of contract. They are rather payments for not tolerating the breach of contract. Okay. So if you get compensation, cash compensation called as liquidated damages, I don't think it will be considered as supply. Anyway, let me read it fully. Where the amount paid as liquidated damages is an amount paid only to compensate for injury, loss or damage suffered by the aggrieved party due to breach of the contract, and there is no agreement express or implied by the aggrieved party receiving the liquidated damages to refrain from or tolerate an act or to do anything for the party paying the liquidated damages. In such cases, liquidated damages are merely a flow of money from the party who causes the breach of the party to the party who suffers loss or damage due to such breach. Such payments do not constitute consideration for a supply and are not taxable. This discussion is only for information purpose and is not relevant for examination purposes. Okay, anyway, so I will not read this when we do revision. Just understand sum and substance, liquidated damages not considered as supply. So I will stop here. We will stop here. We will continue this from tomorrow. So we have studied till 2.56. So we have almost covered more than 50% of this chapter. That's a good progress. So it's been how many days? It's been 7 days since we started this chapter and we are going to finish this chapter. Again, let's remember that we are not reading just one round of this. We have almost completed the 56 pages, 52 pages, 2 rounds. And this is the first round of today. This we have done today, first round. Some of you have been asking about should I make notes or something. I'm not going to make notes. I have to clarify that I'm not going to be making notes as of now. I will be writing and doing some sort of active recall maybe after we complete round 4 or round 5. Maybe after that. I will keep you posted about that. Anyway, thank you for joining today's session. I will meet you tomorrow. Thank you and bye-bye.